Pay no attention to the young lady who should be behind the screen.
Hi.
Anyway, as promised, I'm going to be doing a little lesson on some of the stuff that you're learning on Apex, particularly for this video is for the seniors. This is about Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Before starting, if I remember correctly from some of the seniors that I helped tutor on this for Apex, I think some of the questions were about Romanticism and Gothic literature. So anyway, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Romantic literature and Gothic literature. Now, originally, Romantic literature wasn't just the kissy face books, although that was part of it. Romanticism was originally the idea that emotion was more important than reason and logic. And so if you're studying romantic literature, like classic romantic literature, it's not just the what we call romantic literature today, which is the kissing books. It was just any story that had high emotion in it, that valued emotion. And also Gothic literature now. Gothic literature is horror, like Dracula and Frankenstein would be considered Gothic. And now, Frankenstein, I'm going to summarize it, and hopefully that will help you who are taking the quizzes. Okay, so the story starts with a ship's captain named Robert Walton. And he is, the story is written in what would be called epistolary format, meaning in a series of letters that Walton is sending to his sister before he sets off toward the North Pole, which is an expedition that he's headed on in a ship with a crew. And while they're sailing, they become trapped in ice. And while they're trapped in ice, while they're waiting for the ice to break up, they meet Victor Frankenstein. Now, Victor Frankenstein is different from his monster. Frankenstein himself is the creator. The monster never actually has a name. It's always referred to as Frankenstein's monster. So anyway, they meet Victor, who is trying to head towards the North Pole on a dog sled, but he's really weak. And so they take him aboard and try to get him better. And while Walton is taking care of Frankenstein tells him the story, which is the bulk of the story. So Frankenstein started off with a happy childhood, and he grew up in Geneva. He was raised alongside of a young lady named Elizabeth. In the original version, I believe Elizabeth was his cousin, and then in later versions it was changed that she was just like a foster sister. Anyway, he has a friend named Henry Clavell, and he also grows up with him. Anyway, when they get older, he goes to university in Ingolstadt, and he is studying natural philosophy and chemistry. And he gets obsessed with the idea that he can create life from just bringing a bunch of parts together. And so he tries to do that. So he becomes obsessed with creating the monster. He's like the classic mad scientist, and he does that. And then after he creates it, it comes to life, but he's so disgusted and horrified by the monster that he runs away. And while he's wandering around the streets, he runs into his old friend, let's see, Henry. Let's see, I think. Okay, yeah, so Henry, and he takes Henry back with him to his apartment where the monster was, but it's not there anymore. And if for a while he's relieved. He's like, oh, it's out of sight, out of mind. But he decides that he wants to go back to Geneva, and just before leaving, he gets a letter from his dad saying that his youngest brother, William, has been murdered. And so he hurries home, and while he's passing through the woods, he sees the monster. And he suspects that the monster did something to his brother. And when he gets home, he finds out that a young lady named Justine was convicted of the murder and was executed. And he feels so bad about it because he's sure that it was the monster he created that killed his own brother. And this poor Justine got blamed for it. So anyway, he wants to get over his grief, and so he takes a trip to the mountains. And while he's there, the monster confronts him and tells him his side of the story. After the monster was, according to the monster, after he was created, he wandered around, not sure what to do with himself, until he found this poor family. And he decided that he liked the poor family, and he learned to speak by listening to them, and he learned to read by finding some books and learning to read from those books. And he would do favors for the family, like he'd bring him wood, and he made friends with the father of the family because the father of the family was blind and couldn't see his horrible face. And but then the rest of the family found out and chased him off. And so that's the story that Victor tells, that he tells Victor. And then he says, you know what? I wouldn't be such a problem to you if you would make me a wife. I want you to make me a wife, and then I'll take my wife and we'll go off to the jungles of South America and we will never bother you again. And Victor starts doing that. And then he thinks, oh no, if I make him a spouse, they're going to make baby monsters. And these baby monsters are going to trouble humanity, and this is just going to be this terrible species. It's just going to be a problem to humanity. And so he changes his mind, and also part of the reason why he changes his mind is while he's working on the female monster, he looks up and he sees the monster looking at him through the window, grinning at him like this. And it scares him. And so he destroys the female monster and he throws her body in the water. But of course, this makes the monster mad. And so what does the monster do? But he goes and kills his friend Henry Clerval. So the monster, to get revenge for being mistreated so badly, is just going around killing all of his friends and family. And guess who he's going to go after next? Okay, so anyway, he goes back to Geneva and he marries Elizabeth. And they go off on their honeymoon, but the monster told him that if he didn't, that he was going to go after Victor on his wedding night. And so he's like, oh, the monster's going to come after me, so I need to be armed and ready, and I'll put Elizabeth in this safe place where she'll be safe, but I'm going to patrol up and down everywhere with my guns. But instead of going after Victor, the monster breaks through the window and kills Elizabeth. So now she's dead. And then when Victor's dad hears about Elizabeth's death, he is so grief-stricken because he's lost so many family members and friends that he dies. So Victor's now super sad, and he's really mad, and he's gonna go after the monster and stop him. And so he goes after the monster and he chases him northward on a dog sled, and they somehow both got a hold of dog sleds. And Victor's chasing the monster. And this is when he meets Walton, and this is where the story catches up to Walton's narrative. And so So anyway, Walton takes over the narrative, and his men are wanting to turn back because it's too dangerous, and Victor gives this big speech about how they better not turn back. But then Walton decides to do that anyway, and then Victor, apparently too sickened to recover, and possibly just heartbroken from all the bad things that have happened to him and losing all these people that he loves, he eventually dies. And Walton later finds that the monster has gotten in and is crying over Victor's dead body. And the monster explains to Walton how hard his life has been, and how he is now going to go and take his dog sled up to the very North Pole, and he's going to build a big fire, and he's going to throw himself on the fire and commit suicide. And then the monster leaves, and the last Walton sees of him is the monster going off into the dark, and he never sees him again. And that's the end of the story. And so we are to assume that the monster was successful in committing suicide. And that's Frankenstein. And hopefully that will help you, those of you who are seniors who are taking quizzes on Frankenstein.